So, nonetheless, the fire chief testified that the proposed project does not pose concern with the fire department's ability to operate on the site. That was ultimately what that testimony indicated. Is it ideal? No, but he also indicated that lots of projects are not ideal from a firefighting perspective, but this one is sufficient for his apparatus to go onto the site, to operate on the site, and for the chief to fight fires. And despite all of this, the applicant has taken the additional step of engaging a fire safety consultant, Kevin Hastings, and he opined also that the access drive and the ability of the fire department to maneuver on the drive meets applicable codes and is satisfactory for that purpose. In sum, although a larger drive may provide more convenience and some benefits, it's just simply not necessary here. We've heard a couple of times, many times over the course of the last 6.5 months, that the access drive is being designed specifically to avoid the MEPA thresholds. The applicant has never indicated that that's the case. The applicant, of course, is trying to minimize impact on wetlands, and they're designing a drive that they think is also adequate for the site, and which the engineering also supports, as well as the zoning code, the subdivision rules, and all other applicable laws and codes. If we were to increase the drive size to the width that Katie Conlon had suggested and Kathleen has suggested in her recent submissions, we would essentially be increasing the size of the drive to be approximately equal to the size of Randolph Avenue itself. That's a 4-lane state highway that has 25,000 vehicles traveling on it per day. This drive will have 700 vehicles on it. An access drive the size of Randolph Avenue for a 90-unit site is ridiculous, with all due respect. The second item I wanted to address is the underwater detention system. The applicant's approach here is a standard approach for modern developments. It is commonly used now, including in Boston quite regularly, and it meets all state stormwater management standards. Again, the town's peer reviewer, Niche Engineering, accepted the design as adequate and appropriate, and his only comment at the end of the response period was simply that he suggested that maintenance be carried out, which it will. This project will be managed by a professional management company. They've paid attention to the underwater detention system. They've made revisions to the plans as a result of the comments that they've received to provide better access to the underwater system, and the applicant will be able to make any repairs to the underwater detention system that may be necessary in the future. There is no reason, health, safety, environmental, engineering, or regulatory, for this requirement. Another comment that has recently been coming up repeatedly is with respect to parking. The comment made specifically is that there aren't additional land available for reserve parking in the event that that's needed. Vanas, we believe that there is sufficient parking. Vanas concurred with that conclusion. He said the ratio that the site has for parking per units is sufficient. And the parking is really an operational and a management issue. Of course, the applicant does not want to overburden the parking lots, is not going to allow folks to park on the access drive. Certainly, nobody's going to park on Randolph Avenue with the developer's consent anyway. The fact is that here, the applicant's plans with respect to parking is to manage it. Currently, the plan is to give each unit tenant, one free parking space per unit. 25 spaces will be allocated for staff and visitors, and that leaves an additional 40 spaces for reserve, which will be used in accordance with the actual future needs of the development as they develop. If we need more spaces for staff and visitors, then those could be used for that purpose, or they could also be rented to tenants in the building as additional spaces. The fourth and final comment that has been raised recently has been with respect to the gap analysis. We, at the last hearing, provided a brief overview of the study and the results of that. And prior to this hearing, we had submitted a memo that further explained that gap analysis. And Professor Delaski will elaborate and walk you through the gap analysis. But to give you the highlights, at the end of the day, there are sufficient gaps for vehicles to turn during the peak hour onto Randolph Avenue, left or right. So gaps in the traffic in reality should not be a problem for the site. Nonetheless, again, the applicant has agreed to restrict left-hand turns out of Randolph Avenue during the AM peak hour to alleviate any concern that the board might have with respect to that issue. And with that, I would like to ask Professor Delaski to provide a summary of his gap memo and to answer any questions that you might have with respect to it.
Great, thank you. Professor Delaski, welcome back to the board.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
You're becoming a regular.
Hopefully close to the last and final, right? Daniel Delaski, registered professional engineer in the state of Massachusetts, consultant to DeSalle Burke on this project in Milton, Mass. And so taking a step back and looking at what we did in terms of a gap analysis, what we look at in terms of this site and traffic leaving the proposed development would be the availability of gaps on the roadway to allow for vehicles to take a left or right out of the driveway. And so when we're talking about a gap, and you can understand this from your experience, you're waiting to pull out of a side street and you're just basically waiting for a vehicle to pass. Their rear bumper and the leading bumper to the following or the tailing vehicle is the gap. So if you think about just a single stream of traffic going by you, that vehicle is passed, or you're anticipating that vehicle passing, and you're looking down the street and you're saying, okay, you know what, that vehicle is 300, 400 feet back. Based on my vehicle that I'm driving, based on my acceleration, based on where I am, I'll be able to make that gap, okay? So if we have a clear understanding of that, the AASHTO Green Book, which is basically the design manual for streets and roadways, has a default value that we use, which is usually somewhere between 7.5 to 8 seconds for an acceptable gap. And what that means is if you're that's for a left-hand turn from a side street. So if you're leaving from a stop sign and you want to take a left-hand turn, it takes you somewhere between 7.5 to 8 seconds, depending on the grade, to basically assess that there is a gap, take your foot off of the brake, step on the accelerator, and join the traffic stream. And what's important here is to note that you're accelerating so that the traffic is not slowing down. So when you think about 8 seconds to make that left-hand turn, that's an awful long time. Okay, 8 seconds, we can count, we can think about that. But the important thing is you're speeding up to join the traffic stream. So when you think about Randolph Avenue, you've got vehicles passing by at 45 miles an hour. It takes you a little bit of time to accelerate to that speed. And so when you look at the 7.5 and 8 seconds, that's what we're looking at. So back at the end of the end of April, we had a firm go out and they basically did a gap study on Randolph Avenue. What they did is they sat at 7-Eleven in Randolph Ave, that is, and they had a board. And every time a vehicle went by, they would note that that was the rear bumper or the tailing bumper, the front bumper of the vehicle, and that started to establish gaps. Okay, they put that into a software program, and from that software program, they were able to determine the number of gaps that would allow somebody to take a left or right out of the site, and similarly a left or right into the site, depending on what direction they're traveling from. So,
how many days did they?
They did it for 1 day.
1 day.
7 to 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon.
And what day of the week did they?
That was a Thursday, April 30th.
Is that representative?
Yeah, it's a typical day. So we try to avoid Mondays and Fridays just because people take days off or they leave early for the weekend and things
When
like that.
did they do the study? Do you know the date?
April 30th.
Thank you.
April 30th.
And what was the weather? You know, was it reasonable weather?
It was
wasn't
reasonable, and that's my
foggy or-
recollection. From my recollection, it was a typical day. And so from those data, right, so the 7 to 9 a.m., 4 to 6 p.m., we have 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. I matched it up to the peak hour. So in the peak hour in the morning, we have 7:15 to 8:15. So when is the heaviest traffic out there? It's between 7:15 and 8:15 in the morning. And in the afternoon, it's between 5 and 6 p.m. And so when you look at the anticipated traffic leaving the site, taking a left, and the number of gaps available, and you can see this under data analyses in your report that was submitted earlier this week, the left turn from a minor, so people leaving this development in the morning we're expecting 27 people to go north, okay? And when you look at the single gaps available, there are 19 gaps right now in the traffic stream, okay? Which means that there are less gaps than people wanting to take a left. But if you dig into the data a little bit deeper, you'll find that there are what we call multiple vehicle gaps. So those gaps are longer. They might be 10, they might be 12, they might be 15, they might be 20 seconds long. And so that means that if there's 1 or 2 or 3 vehicles sitting there at the stop sign waiting to pull out of the development, they can all accept a longer gap. And so when you look at the data that were collected, ironically enough, there are 27 vehicles wanting to take a left, at least that's our projected volume, and there are 27 gaps in the traffic stream during the AM peak. And you have those data in front of you. With that in mind, the developer has said, you know what, looking at the 27 versus 19 in terms of the single gaps, what we would like to do is restrict the left turns out of the site in the morning, and what we would encourage people to do through the management office, as well as a sign leaving the development, is to take a right down Randolph Avenue, take a right on Chickatobit Road, and then come up Unquity and join Blue Hills Parkway where you would if you had stayed on Randolph Ave and taken a left. So that's the morning analysis. In the afternoon, we looked at the 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. period because that coincides with the peak hour that we determined through the traffic impact and access study. And there we have, if we look at single vehicle gaps, we have 17 and 17. We have 17 vehicles wanting to take a left out of the site. We've got 17 gaps available in the traffic stream. So we're looking at southbound traffic and northbound traffic. How does that coincide? What's the probability of that gap being there? It's actually a match. It's a 1-for-1. If we look at the multiple vehicle gaps, we have 24 available in the traffic stream, and we have 17 wanting to take a left. So we have more available gaps if we're including the multi-vehicle gap compared to the vehicles that want to take a left or the drivers that want to take a left. We also want to look at, when you think about accessing the site, in the northbound direction, you're traveling on Randolph Avenue, and you want to pull into the site. So you've got to cross the southbound traffic lane. So briefly, we looked at the AM peak. There are 3 projected people or 3 projected drivers wanting to take a left into the site, so they're heading northbound. It's in the morning. It's 7:15 to 8:15. 3 people want to take a left in. There are 56 available gaps in that southbound traffic stream. And in the afternoon, from 5 to 6, you have 13 people that want to take a left, again, heading northbound. And you have 157 actual gaps. And again, that's based on data that were collected on a typical day, Thursday, April 30th, 2015.
Why would there be such a remarkable difference between the gaps at 7:15 in the morning, people taking a left, or people taking a right? It's striking. People taking a left, crossing the 4 lanes. Is it just because the people who are heading north, taking a left into the project, would only be crossing 2 lanes?
That's correct.
And therefore, it's easier to accomplish.
As well as when you think about the distribution of traffic. Where are people going in the morning?
They're going north.
They're northbound. So southbound, the traffic is relatively, I want to say, light. And so to find a gap in the opposing traffic across 2 lanes is relatively easy, and those gaps would be frequent. And the same thing, when you think about traffic, people are rushing to get in the morning to work. They've got a time that they need to be there. 8 o'clock.
Especially Mr. Mullen.
Especially Mr. Mullen. I'll take your word for it, Mr. Leonard. They've got to be there for 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Yep. At night, if somebody has to be in Milton for 7 o'clock, they might grab dinner somewhere. There's not that peaking. Okay. So people might go to the gym after work. There's not that demand to be at a certain place. Mr. Leonard.
Okay, that's fine. I don't think Mr. Mullen goes to the gym either. He goes in the morning, he says. That's why he's in such a hurry to get north.
Fair enough.
Have you completed your analysis?
I have. That's the summary.
Okay, well, let's see if we have any questions from Mr. Jeffrey Mullen.
Have you thought about how many people are actually going to go down Chickatobit to pick up the Parkway as a practical matter to get into town?
I have. And when you think about it, the analogy is traffic is like water. And people are going to seek out their own routes. They're going to find the route that works for them. We drove the site, we drove Chickatobit as a cut-through after the peak hour. It takes about 5 additional minutes to go down Chickatobit, down to Unquity, up to Blue Hills. There might be opportunities when you think about sitting in traffic. I, for one, as a driver, I'd rather be moving. So if I can move for 5 additional minutes and not sit at a traffic signal, I'd rather be moving. So if I can take a right out without waiting, a minute, minute and a half, 30 seconds, whatever it is, take a left, then wait at the Randolph Ave signal. If I can take a right out very easily, go south at the speed limit, go down Chickatobit and Unquity to Blue Hills, I'd prefer to be moving personally. I can't speak for everybody living in the development, but I know personally I'd rather be moving.
Why wouldn't you take a left at Chickatobit?
Why wouldn't I take a left? I guess I could do that as well and go up to Braintree and then hop on 93 there as well.
You go down to Quincy, and you'd get into, you go down by Corey Hills. You could do it that way.
Sure, you could do that as well.
Well,
There
I
with
think-
the lefts, if I may, Mr. Mullen, taking a left at a signalized intersection when there's heavy traffic in the opposite direction, it's probably going to be easier for me to go down and take that
Taking
right.
rights.
Yeah.
Have you thought about the impact on Mark Lane?
On Mark Lane, I haven't.
Okay.
Where's Mark Lane? I know Clifton. Is Clifton and Mark that general area or farther south?
It's the next right after the golf course.
The next right after the golf course. I haven't thought about that in terms of cut through or the like.
Seems to be the most likely, that's Mark, right?
Yeah.
And that's not restricted?
I don't remember seeing that as I was driving on the street yesterday. There was one street that's
So you're going
like a
up, you're
dead
going
end,
heading
right?
south on Randolph, you go past the golf course where I think a lot of people would probably pull in to turn around, but even if they didn't, the next right is Mark. And that's a fairly spread out, similar to Indian Cliffs, type of development that's not restricted. That's the first right, not restricted, and I'm interested in whether or not the neighbors in Mark Lane, or when you get to the end, you go down Mark Lane, you take the first left, you get to Hillside, you take another left, you're back at the light, and then you could head north on Randolph. It seems to me that if the move was a right out of the driveway, the most logical thing people would do would be to take Mark, then take a left, then take a left on Hillside, and take another left at the light.
So when I look at,
As a practical matter.
so Mark doesn't, the reason I didn't know Mark Lane is it actually abuts or it intersects Hillside and Heather. So Mark does not intersect 28 according to Google Maps. And so, if-
No, it does.
Yeah, it does. I'm
Okay.
looking at it right now.
Yeah,
I'm looking at it as well. All right, so what I'm looking at is Mark Lane, you would have to come down and take a right onto Hillside, and then take a right onto Mark, or whatever, if you want to call it Mark and Hillside, that's fine.
yeah.
And then take a right onto Heather, and then wait for an acceptable gap in Randolph Ave traffic to pull back out and go north.
There's a light there, though, at Hillside, right?
Understood, but then you're going to be back into the same
No,
scenario.
I'm just wondering, I don't know what people will do either, I agree with you, but I do know people don't like to go in the wrong direction. And I think that's just kind of one of those probabilities of traffic. And what I'm interested in is the introduction of this as a proposal late in the process, and whether or not we've had a time to discuss with that the impact on the neighborhood. And it seems to me like by doing this, by making this proposal, we're introducing an impact into a new neighborhood. And while most of the people in this audience probably watching this hearing are from the Highland Street, the ladder streets, I'll call them ladder streets, along by the hospital, we haven't heard a lot from the, is it the Scotts Woods neighborhood, perhaps? Would you call it that? Hillside? So, and you know, we've, and John and Ginny know this, we've seen a lot of those folks over the years, given the unique area that is. So that's really the point, and it's just studying how the real impact, and as a practical matter, I don't think people are going to go that far out of their way to go up by Ewan Rink to hop back on the Parkway and then get back into town, but I could be wrong, so, all right.
Just to that point, Mr. Mullen, if I may, we're talking about 38 additional vehicles, so you're talking about one every 1.5 minutes. So in the traffic stream, in the volume that's out there today, I would say it's virtually unnoticeable.
Well, again, it's a respect for the neighbors, and it's an
Understood.
understanding, you know, if I lived on Mark Lane, one might be too many, I don't know that.
Understood.
Have you given any thought to this bus stop issue and whether or not the width of that cross-section at the bottom is adequate to accommodate those idling parents or cars waiting for the kids?
All right,
Any
so
thoughts on that?
you want to talk
Or is that
about?
a site development issue?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've sat idly by listening to the driveway discussion, so I can certainly opine to that. But in terms of the bus stop stopping on Randolph Avenue, when you look at boarding and alighting times, it's going to take a student 2 seconds plus or minus to get on the bus. It takes the student about the same to get off the bus. So there's really no
You mean
difference.
to get
To actually
to
board the
to go
bus.
from the public, from the sidewalk, to board the bus and to get to a seat takes 2 seconds?
2 seconds to board, and then it might take an additional second or two to have the students get in their seat.
It depends how full the bus is.
Correct. If they're standing people, it takes longer.
And the age of the child, probably.
What's the,
Well, little tykes may need some assistance to go on the bus, don't they? 4 or 5-year-olds, or
kindergartners? I've seen kindergartens climb up the stairs on a bus.
I don't assist my kindergartner on the
Or
bus.
maybe we're more protective of our children in Milton, I don't know. But really, you
I'm not gonna go down that road.
Isn't it 5 or 6 seconds?
It's not. Studies have shown, when I'm talking about buses, and they don't break it down for school buses versus transit buses, we're talking somewhere around 2 seconds for somebody to board. It takes 2 seconds for the doors to open, it takes 2 seconds for the doors to close. And when you look at alighting times, it's somewhere around 1.7 to 2 seconds for people to alight or leave a bus. So,
Right, but you can't operate the bus until the children are safely seated. Isn't that
understood.
true?
That's right.
And
So the,
kids tend to be collegial and happy little kids who like to say hello to their buddies and things. Doesn't that normally happen? This is not,
I haven't been on a
The
bus.
Russian army
I haven't
getting
been
on the bus.
been on a bus in over 25 years, so I can't speak to the authority of the bus driver, which I would think plays into this quite a bit in terms of, all right, you're on the bus, let's sit down and we're going to get moving. So again, I'm not going to speak to that, but I will speak to this. If you think about the two things that I'm going to opine on, the bus stopping on 28. We heard tonight that the bus would only stop in the southbound direction. By law, traffic in both directions has to stop. If you look at, let's say, and we don't have numbers, and I think it's tough to project, but let's say that there are 10 students boarding a bus. 10 students boarding a bus, all right? Let's say conservatively that takes 30 seconds total. The bus pulls over, the stop sign goes out, you've taken 30 seconds, all right? When you think about the southbound traffic, they may be stopping at a signal anyway. So now that they're stopping behind the bus, there may not be any additional delay to their overall trip. In the northbound direction, the same thing is happening. You're approaching a signal. The likelihood of you getting that green signal, I don't know, I'd have to go through the analysis. But what I'm arguing, or at least opining on, is that when you think about somebody stopping the bus, this bus stop, you're going to be delayed whether you're at the bus stop or you're going to be delayed at the signal, probably. And again, I don't have the probability to run and say it's 80%, 20%, or the like, but what I'm going to say is that when you think about 30 seconds on that route in one direction, it happens all the time. I get stuck behind a bus going to the train station in the morning. Guess what? Tomorrow morning I'm leaving 2 minutes earlier, so I don't get stuck behind that bus. But in the northbound direction, when I'm going into work on 28, I only have to stop for that one bus. It's not like I'm behind that bus and that bus is stopping every 3 minutes or every 300 feet.
are there any statistics dealing with rear-end crashes to buses that are stopped on major thoroughfares for a minute or 2 minutes?
I haven't looked into that, so I can't speak with authority as to what exists out there for statistics regarding that.
Are there any traffic or safety regulations or articles of traffic engineers that have in general agreement that if you have young kids waiting on the sidewalk at a major thoroughfare as to some type of safety concerns or corralling or doing something to keep the kids within the confines of the project so that they'll remain safe and won't be running around?
My experience has been that the parents, or if you're at a preschool and they're waiting for the children to board a bus, the guard or the guardian that's there with the students, they're keeping them back 10 to 15 feet from the roadway. You know, I've gone back and forth in terms of what's the proper side of the street to wait on. Those vehicles coming southbound, if an errant vehicle left the street and the students are on the far side, so they'd be on the south side, that worries me. Okay, but then if you put them on the north side and you've got a turning vehicle, that worries me as well, because if that vehicle goes out of control, then it's you know, injuring those students. So it's the same on all bus stops. And I've thought long and hard about it, and you'll see a lot of parents and a lot of guardians, they'll keep the students back 10 to 15 feet from the intersecting roadway, whether it's major or minor, to more or less make sure that they're safe.
As Ms. O'Donnell, I think, suggested, if we have inclement weather or cold conditions or whatever it may be, and you have parents who drive down the 24-foot wide driveway and they're kind of lined up there waiting for the school bus to arrive, they're going to be a significant distance back, aren't they, from Randolph Avenue? And presumably they're going to see the school bus pull up and stop, and you may have somebody who's 10 cars back or 12 cars back, and they have to get themselves organized, grab their books and their bags, and the parent will take them out and set them up and then safely walk towards the bus. Isn't that additional time that gets factored into the time of boarding buses?
Well, it depends on how responsible the parent is. If the parent knows that the bus is coming down the street and they can see it, and they're saying goodbye to their son or daughter, and the son or daughter's grabbing the umbrella, and by the time the bus gets there, the son or daughter's there. We're talking about behavior, and I can't give you the statistics on behavior in terms of, is somebody leaving their vehicle to be considerate because they don't want that bus to stop for long on 28? I don't have those data or
Or
statistics.
kids who forget their lunch, or they forget their books, and they have to, I mean, those things happen,
Of
don't
course,
they?
is it a random event? Is it a normal event? Question mark. You know,
It depends on how many kids, probably, doesn't it?
well, the probability certainly changes when you increase your sample size, but when you think about, all right, so you left your lunch yesterday, make sure you don't leave your lunch today.
Isn't that indicative, though, that if that scenario takes place frequently during inclement weather or the cold weather, wouldn't that indicate to you that while they're waiting and you're in a 24-foot driveway, and all of a sudden the bus comes and whoops, the doors are opened and everyone's getting in and out, that really kind of shrinks the utility of that 24-foot driveway, and you'd have to be especially cautious under those circumstances as opposed to if you had a larger driveway with a median strip, as one of the traffic engineers suggested.
You just hit the nail on the head for me. Extremely cautious. Absolutely. I love the idea of drivers entering the site extremely cautious.
Do you like the idea of
I like-
developers providing roadways of sufficient width that you don't even have to experience those people who may not be reasonably cautious? Or if you foresee that there happens to be somebody who has a heart attack on the site at the time the bus is there, or that there's a fire on the site, doesn't that indicate to you that a 24-foot wide driveway, under those perhaps unique circumstances, but circumstances involving public safety, that you would exercise your judgment and your wisdom to do a wider driveway to alleviate those possible risks?
So here's the challenge we have. It's called balance.
Yes.
And when we look at balance and you look at the suggested cross-section of 16, 8, and 16, okay, what does that mean? That means that most of the time, when there aren't these rare occurrences, you're going to have drivers pulling into those sites and traveling at higher speeds than would be expected because you've got a 16-foot cross-section. When you think about a tighter cross-section, curb to curb width 24 feet, let's talk about the vehicle width. Go out and measure your vehicle at home. How wide is it?
7 feet, 8 feet?
Less than 7.
Okay.
Less than 7. So if we're 6, 6.5, or 7, we can go 3 vehicles wide. 7 by 7 by 7. There's 21 feet. We still have 3 feet, and if you think about courtesy streets, or if you go up to Cambridge or Boston, and some of the streets in Boston and Cambridge, they're relatively tight. What do you do when they're tight? You go down the street cautiously. You're close to bumping mirrors.
How wide is the typical ladder fire truck?
Without mirrors, 8 feet.
Okay, do most of them have mirrors? I assume
Most
they
of
do.
most of the trucks, and this is where I get into arguments with the fire chiefs frequently, is I like to err on the side of let's have a narrower street because that's going to slow traffic down all the time. If there's a fire and there's a fire truck coming down that street, guess what? I'm getting out of the way. I'm getting out of the way. So I'm pulling up on the curb. The truck can go by. Most fire chiefs like to have 10 feet so they can clear their mirrors. The mirrors are up higher. The physical truck is 8 feet wide. And we measured the pumper out here, and I believe it was 8 or just over 8 feet wide. So when you look at the physical space provided on this driveway, if you have a vehicle that's parked there, the 7-foot vehicle or the 6.5-foot vehicle, can the fire truck still
they're
get by?
going in a line 10 feet deep.
Sure, and they're going in line 10 feet deep. They're all
And the
about,
bus, and the bus is out there.
and the bus is on 28. You still have an open lane for drivers, for vehicles to pull into. You're not going to obstruct the people pulling into.
How
I
about
think-
when the fire truck is taking a right-hand turn and there just happens to be some 2 or 3 people who don't have children who are seeking to exit the site and they're not aware that somebody has suffered a heart attack or that a building is on fire, and they're trying to gain access to the roadway in order to make this left-hand turn through the gaps that you suggest are there with sufficient frequency.
Well, again, I go
Doesn't-
back to behavior, and if I'm driving down that roadway and I see a fire truck trying to get in, either I'm stopping and letting him in, or I'm trying to get down that street as fast as possible, take the right and get out of his way.
Right, but what if you can't? If you're boxed in, you're halfway down that lane of 10 cars, you can't take a right?
Again, we're back to
You can't-
behavior, we're beeping, we're asking people to move.
But doesn't having a wider driveway give you more, a feeling of a safer environment under difficult circumstances? And don't you always want to try to plan for a worst-case scenario, such as somebody who needs a doctor right away because they're dying, or a building that's on fire?
Well, again, worst case conservative scenario, I can appreciate that. For the instance that you're describing, we're still talking about, you've got a sidewalk that
I mean,
the,
on fires and heart attacks, extraordinary conditions, how many people are going to have a heart attack there? But if somebody does, and they can't get up that driveway, I don't want to attend their funeral. So wouldn't it give you more, couldn't you sleep better at night, forgetting the engineering sciences, couldn't you sleep better at night if you knew you had a wider driveway there?
for me, the question is, when I think about the daily use of this site, what is it? It's people pulling in and people pulling out. Do I want them to pull in fast and drive down that road at 20 or 30 miles an hour? No, I don't. I'd prefer to have a narrow driveway and some sidewalk, mountable curve that somebody could get over and around if an instance like you are describing happened. So,
So
you know,
you prefer, when you're talking about your gap analysis, you prefer that somebody who's sitting there, who's 65 years of age in their Chevrolet, that they see a gap and they say, that's 7.6 seconds, so I'm within the gap, and that they're going to floor it and get out of there, and with traffic coming 45, 50 miles an hour, and you say, well, the statistics say that that's safe, but you know in reality, people are going to die out there doing that.
the beauty of a 65-year-old,
Isn't that right?
the beauty of the 65-year-old in the Chevrolet,
Because they're more cautious.
he
you're
or
gonna tell
she
me.
knows their limitations. He or she is not going to be out in the 7:15 to 8:15 traffic. And if they are, he or she would be taking that right road.
No, wait a minute, wait a minute.
What are they going to do
I
instead?
work for a living.
Jeez.
Hit a nerve.
So the point is, if somebody makes a foolish decision like that, they're going to get seriously hurt. And likewise, if in the end, perhaps the unusual circumstance where the fire truck is coming in the entrance and people are trying to get down and you've got a queue of cars, you're going to have somebody either hurt or somebody's going to die.
So
Isn't that true?
if the queue of cars is an issue, then we can certainly look at designs possibly that would allow for these drivers that are dropping their children off in the morning. We could bump perhaps the lane out or designate a lane for drivers that are dropping their kids off in the morning and get them out of that 24 feet or get them substantially out of that 24 feet.
Have you actually looked at that?
We haven't.
This is an issue that's been I'm sorry, John, I
No,
know you
no,
had
no,
the
no,
floor, but I
please.
had it first, and you took
You
it
did,
from me.
I did.
This is an issue that's been bothering me for a while because you've asked for a waiver of the frontage requirement in the bylaw, and yet you own the property on both sides of the cross-section at the terminus. So I'm wondering why it hasn't been looked at to widen that, to eliminate, or to at least address this very issue.
So the discussion.
Particularly in light of the bylaw's requirements for, you just don't have enough frontage.
So the discussion right now is, rather than widening the entire entranceway, our concern, at least what I'm hearing from the board, is the fact that these people in the morning will be possibly dropping their children off in their vehicles and potentially blocking access to part of the site, or at least one of the lanes?
Well, no, it's a little bit more general than that. There's been a consistent issue about the width of this driveway, understood. Today, we had a lot of talk about the bus stops that came up at the last meeting. You had made what I thought was something I'd actually like to see, let's drop the lane. But I know, I like traffic calming, and I think that could be very controversial. But I'm intrigued by your right out. And what we're really addressing now is just the bus accommodation, and I've been thinking about that in connection with the request for the board to waive the lot frontage requirement in the bylaw. I mean, this is what we would call a pork chop lot, and it doesn't have enough frontage, and yet the applicant owns enough property on Randolph to accommodate the frontage and to address this issue. And I'm wondering if it's been looked at, and if it has, what's the result of that, and if it hasn't, why not?
Jim?
Mr. Burke, you're going to have to come up here, and so the people on television won't miss you, and they'll know who's talking.
Excellent. Good evening, everybody. And I can answer that fairly quickly.
Would you be kind enough, so everyone on the board here knows who you are, but would you identify yourself for the record?
Sure. Jim Burke, I'm a registered civil engineer in Massachusetts, representing the applicant for H&W Apartments.
Thank you.
The issue comes with regards to the other two lots. We take frontage away from those, it creates zoning issues for those.
Yeah. Okay.
We could certainly.
So it's a money issue then? It's a value issue, you're going to have to give up.
Create a zoning issue on two developer lots. Now, if you wanted to, we could certainly take a look at, possibly knocking down the house and creating frontage, joining frontage for the other lots. But that's
You could get a variance, perhaps.
perhaps.
I don't know what the Board of Appeals would do under that
It's something,
circumstance.
honestly, when we looked at the development, we had two viable, single-family homes, and you could consider them affordable. And,
Consider
we
them
took,
affordable.
No, I don't think you, what's the frontage of those two lots? You know
off the
offhand?
top of my head, I don't.
Are
It's
they
right here.
7-Eleven is bigger than 16. I don't know, I don't think at this point we have the opportunity, given time constraints, it's what we've all been talking about, it's a balance. And one of the things that's emerged here is there's a significant safety issue on Route 28 with entering and exit the site, which there have been various proposals to address that. My issue is given the scope of the board's review of this, and the concern over public safety as one of our main criteria under the statute, that we've got to give that a good hard look. And I don't think that that's been done here, particularly given this particular problem. That's not to say that that's the exclusive issue with respect to safety, but that would be one way to at least begin to mitigate it. That's all. That's all.
Okay. Mr. Delasky, I'm sorry, Mr. Burke, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Okay, Mr. Delasky, have you?
I have another question.
Yes, sir.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind.
So we've talked a lot about this site, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do think we've established that this is an auto-centric development.
Well, that's what Mr. Delasky testified to
I think
last
you've
time.
coined that term for me, Mr. Mullen, if I may say so.
Is it auto-centric?
Didn't you say that?
He
in-
said
Good. Vehicle-centric.
He said
Yeah.
vehicle-centric.
The site is vehicle-centric.
Correct.
Okay. You got 90 units of housing. You got some ones, some twos, and some threes. Not a significant amount of threes, mainly twos. Has it been your experience that in this type of development, people only have one car?
I can't speak to that. I don't have statistical data to support that assertion either way.
But the plan, Alan, the plan is that there'll be 80 reserved spaces for the tenants, 90 reserved spaces for the tenants. So each tenant, regardless of the size of the unit, will get one space.
We also have, as I mentioned, 40 additional spaces in reserve that can be doled out as necessary based on the project needs.
Are they built out, or is it just area that you have available if you needed it?
Built up.
They will
They're
be
built out.
Built up.
Has it been your experience in other developments of this type that people have one car in this type of development?
My experience is it's becoming more and more common for folks to have one car.
In this type of development?
Yeah, in this type of a.
So what does the couple do? How does that work?
Well, now we're getting into dangerous
No,
territory,
I
but
just
you,
think it's important for the parking. I don't think there's enough parking there. Or at least I would question whether there's enough parking in this site. The evidence is, this application is full of discussion about the proximity to the T, the availability of BAT, the fact that Ashmont Station's up the street, the pedestrian-friendly nature of the site, and yet we've really established that it's auto-centric. That's the point. And I'm wondering whether it's reasonable to think that the parking is actually enough in light of the testimony. Put an application aside. I see the words in the application,
Sure.
but I don't think they match up with the testimony.
Right, it's not just our application, though. Your own peer reviewer had indicated the parking is sufficient. I mean, I don't know how to otherwise address that. If it was a concern, I would imagine your peer reviewer would have raised it and highlighted it, and he didn't.
It's just my own sense of how people live these days in places like this, and that few people, indeed, I would actually love it if there were no parking, but I just don't think that's practical, given the way people live in places like this that are, notwithstanding the fact that it's centrally located in the town of Milton, it's actually pretty remote. But that's all. I have one more question. I don't know if it's for the traffic or for the site, and that is, when you measure the length of the driveway, how is that done? And where does the driveway actually end, given the fact that the motorist is going to have to drive all the way to the end of the lot to get into his or her parking space? Is that parking lot considered part of the driveway? And if not, why not?
I guess the way I considered it, the driveway provides access to the parking lot, and the aisle is exactly that, and the aisle provides access to the parking space. I guess you could look at it from a standpoint is that it's one long driveway that provides access to a single parking space at the very end. But I divided it up from a driveway that provides access to the parking lot.
I think you could do that in some scenarios, but the way this works, I don't think that's right. It feels to me like the driveway actually winds its way through the lot. And I'm wondering if indeed the length of the driveway was as represented, that's all. I'm particularly concerned about that because you've asked for a waiver of the prohibition against using the parking areas for prohibiting pedestrian through the parking areas, and that's something we probably should talk about. It's driveways between parking areas shall not be used for pedestrian traffic. It seems to me we're inviting a conflict between the driver to get to the bulk of the parking in the north of the site with the pedestrian, particularly pedestrians moving between the two buildings. And that's one of the waivers. That's it.
Mr. Caggiano told us that the driveway was 350 feet,
which-
more or
which-
less. Where does that take you?
Brings you back basically to the left turn, the right turn into the parking lot.
Okay, it takes you that deep into the
Yes.
parking area.
Exactly right. It looks, I guess it'd probably be a similar length, just eyeball, and it looks to be about another 300 feet, 350 feet to the end of the parking lot. And I'm just looking at it from here.
Mrs. King, do you have any questions of either witness?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Caggiano, do you have anything further you want to?
I have no questions for these folks here, but I would like to make some concluding remarks, unless anybody else has questions or comments that they'd like to.
Okay, hold on one second. Let's give Ms. O'Donnell an opportunity. Do you have any?
I just wanted to
comments?
call attention to the fire chief's letter dated June 16th, 2015, where he adds to his testimony at the public hearing that he had reviewed the revised plans, and in his estimation, the easterly building, which would be Building 2, as proposed, does not comply with the fire department access road requirements. It exceeds, accessing the building utilizing the two closest points of approach. There's a 250-foot limit, and that's exceeded by 70 feet. So he's saying that he can't, the waivers that, the access that the fire department has to have to the first floor exterior of the building, there's a permission to have the 250-foot distance if it's a sprinklered building, and his calculation is that it's more than 70 feet over that 250-foot limit. In addition, he has said that the comprehensive fire code says that on dead ends, if you have a dead end, the fire department access road in excess of 150 feet, which is clearly the situation here, shall be provided with approved provisions for the fire apparatus to turn around. And there is no room on this site for the fire department trucks to turn around. They've been asked to back up into a fire lane to get in and out, but not have the ability to sort of do a loop. As Rackham and Sawyer, Johanna Schneider has suggested a looped system through the site to address the issue with fire department access. So I just wanted to point out that the fire chief did submit a letter dated June 16th that amends to a certain extent the testimony that was quoted in the letter submitted by the applicant.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We had a question. I'm sorry, Mr. Mullen has a question, then we'll go to.
So I made a comment before about the compliance with the Commonwealth's sustainability guidelines. And is it the applicant's position that the site is pedestrian friendly?
And to whom is that addressed? Mr. Casciano?
Yeah, I think the site is pedestrian-friendly to the extent that it provides access for pedestrians to move and sidewalks for the pedestrians to move from the front door down to Randolph and onto the sidewalks onto Randolph Avenue.
Okay. And when you say close to several amenities in public service on the public services, we're talking about the retail store at the corner of Reedsdale Road and Randolph Avenue?
Do you want to elaborate?
I think we were talking about.
Yeah, we had submitted an update to the sustainable
I'm
development
looking at it,
guidelines.
I'm looking at it, and you've checked off that you've met 5 of the sustainable objectives, but we are building a culvert through a wetland, and I'm interested in the notion that somebody would think that you would walk to Milton Hospital or to the town hall from here, which seems to be indicated, and on paper, it looks like a very pedestrian-friendly site, and yet I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think people will walk to the hospital from here.
Yeah.
Or to the town hall, or even to Tedeschi's. Maybe they will, maybe people will, but that's what this says, and I'm wondering if that's what you guys, what the proposal is.
Sure. So when we put the proposal together, we had added specific areas, listed specific areas like Milton Hospital where, people can walk to, and the shopping, Tedeschi's, that's in the area as well. And this is a determination that Mass Housing looks at and they analyze, and Mass Housing, it's their purview to make the decision about the sustainable nature of the site. And they've looked at it and they've issued a project eligibility letter, which by definition means that they've agreed we've met whatever burden we have there.
Have you shown them this revised one that came to us?
We have not yet, no. The process is typically after a decision is made by the board and a permit issued, then you go back to Mass Housing and update, make any updates to the plans as they've been revised throughout the process. So we do anticipate going back to Mass Housing with this, and they will review it again.
Okay. And on the provide transportation choice, would you say that this development does that?
I think it does. It has BAT buses on Randolph Avenue that people can access, and MBTA buses as well as being able to, drive their vehicles, et cetera.
The BAT buses don't stop. They go by the site. They don't
BAT buses stop.
They stop.
They do stop.
They
Where do they
only
stop?
stop going south.
Up at Tedeschi's?
The BAT, you have contacting the BAT buses, they use the MBTA stops.
They-
In fact, I thought the BAT buses used,
They're not allowed to stop going south until they get out of Milton. And coming north, they're not allowed to stop at all.
I spoke to somebody at BAT yesterday, and they say they will drop off southbound at those stops. It's listed on their website, and that's what they told me.
Go try to pick
Because
one
of
up in Milton.
feedback we've received
No,
from the
not
board
pick people
about
up,
this.
they'll drop off people at those stops.
At the MBTA stop, even though it's not technically a bat stop.
They have those as listed stops, and somebody coming out of, I'm not sure what the other end of that line is, but they drop them off as well. But the
Mr. Cascio,
MBTA bus
I'm sorry.
stops would.
We've reached out to BAT numerous times throughout the last 6.5 months, and the information we received from them and is on their website is consistent.
Mr. Cascio, I have one question. I just want to clarify it. It may be my misunderstanding of the application. When you measure the distance from the subject property to Milton Hospital or to Milton Academy, if any of the residents here are so privileged, is that measurement as the crow flies, or has it been measured going up Randolph Avenue and then taking a right? And do you know whether it's?
It's been so long since we put that application together. Did you
I'm the
recall?
one who did it, so I believe it's
Oh.
not as the crow flies, but I use the street.
Your best recollection is you use the streets
Yeah,
and not as the,
right, because that's the whole point,
because crows aren't living here,
right.
to the
Yeah,
best of our knowledge.
exactly,
Okay,
if I could fly.
okay, thank
They
you.
are now until they go out.
There was a question, yes, sir. What, you come on up here, you
I
have
just
to,
wanted to make one comment.
yes, please.
I also read.
You have to tell us your name, is it Dr.
Richard
Gillis?
Shea,
Richard
Town
Shea.
Meeting Member, Precinct 9.
Thank you.
I also read from what you, got the distances. They were all measured in feet, I noticed. But I also noticed that it described the project being built on a secondary road. And when I saw that, I just didn't bother to read the rest of it. But the reason why I wanted to bring something to your attention, I heard the traffic expert talk about the school bus being able to stop the cars, et cetera. Nobody has talked about the special needs children that will be located in this project. They each in Milton here have either a taxi or a small school bus which picks them up. Milton spends over $100,000 a year on the transportation of special needs children. Might be more than that, but Ms. Conlon can probably tell me the exact number, but it's in that vicinity. So there'll probably be at least 10 to 15 children in a project like this that are going to need special needs transportation. And they take them from this town to different towns on the South Shore, North Shore, et cetera. So each child has their own vehicle usually, picking them up. And they don't have the lights that the school bus has. They're going to stop cars. They're going to come out there and they're going to try to shoot the gap. And nobody has mentioned that these additional cars. I know the expert had 19 cars here and et cetera. There's going to be a lot of special need transportation cars, cabs, whatever you want to call them. They're going to be going in and out of that, and they'll be heading north, heading south, different directions. But there's additional worries for children's safety. I listened to the rebuttal by the counselor. Nothing was said about safety because it's really indefensible.
Can I ask you, Mr. Shea, do you have any specific knowledge of whether special needs buses or vehicles have the same policy as school buses? In other words,
No, I do
do
not.
they go onto private property? And you would think if he
I
had...
don't know that answer, but I do know that the drivers are under the auspices of the company that owns those cabs and buses, et cetera. But I would imagine they're going to have strict rules coming out of that dangerous area. But I think that you should consider there's additional transportation coming in and out of there. Never been mentioned, hasn't been mentioned, just the school bus.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shea. Mr. Delasky, could I ask you another question? You'd have to come up here so you'd be on TV and everyone can see you. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, because if you don't have any knowledge of this, I'm certainly willing to accept it. But do you have any knowledge as to whether the special needs vehicles observe the same protocols as school buses, that they will or will not go on to private property for the purposes of picking up a child that may have mobility issues or have mental issues, and that it would be inappropriate to be bringing that type of child down and having him wait at the school bus.
I have no experience related to that. I would find it hard to believe that you would say to a parent, bring your son or daughter, if there is a mobility issue, down to the bus stop so this bus can stop and pick them up. I would argue that it probably makes the most sense to have them come on site and pick that student
And
up.
those are smaller buses, so they're easily, it's easier for them to access the site.
Easier to back up, easier to pull in, easier to pull up in front of the apartment door and help the student load. It takes a longer amount of time to get one of those get a student that has challenges onto a bus. There might be a lift involved, so I'd find it surprising if those buses are stopping on 28. I would expect them to go into the site.
Ms. Conlon, do you have any knowledge of special needs?
Sorry, I do not. Mr. Leonard.
Then let me ask Mr. Caggiano, I think it would be helpful to know the answer to that question because they're probably the most vulnerable of the students. And could perhaps Professor Dulaski look into that and just do a short letter report or an email or something as to whether these special needs vehicles usually and customarily access private properties in order to service their students. Or do you prefer not to do that? You don't have to do it.
Something that the town would have better information to
Yeah,
answer?
I would think that
But
the
we
town
could-
would have
we
better
could-
Yeah, well,
access
maybe
to that
the
information.
We could ask-
superintendent,
The bus company.
Is the superintendent still here?
No, he left. That's why we put him on first. He
You
had,
can ask. Yeah.
okay, then why don't, can you submit a brief letter to the board on that one issue?
Yep.
Let me ask this now, is there anybody present this evening who has not had a member of the public who has not had an opportunity to speak regarding this application, who wishes to do so this evening, considering this is probably going to be the last public hearing on this project? I see at least two hands, so I think that this young lady was first, and this young lady was second. So why don't you come on up here, and we're delighted to hear from you. Take your time there, be careful, they're tricky.
Good evening, I promise to be brief. My name is Frances Boyle. I am a resident at 52 Clifton Road. I am both a marine biologist and also a registered professional engineer. I have just several comments. I read the application when it was first published about a year ago. The variances requested due to height, frontage, alarmed me. The connection, as Dr. Shea pointed out, to the secondary road, the density, if you look at Milton's website, we're supposed to have 27,000 people with 9,200 homes. This development was supposed to be in keeping with the neighborhood. There are 24 houses on my street. One is a two-family. The other 23 are single-family homes. The final points that I would like to bring to light as the impact to the abutters with the hydrology, the displacement, the water, the rainwater that will be collected off the roofs. I personally hired Mr. DeSalle several years ago to look at it, and he was the one that educated me to the fact that it was the water that runs off the roof that needed to be considered impact to the property. And I thought it was interesting that we're quite certain that 27 cars out of 90 parking spaces will leave in rush hour, yet we are unable to estimate the number of students that will be living in the property. 27 on 90, of course, is 30%. If the 40 extra spaces are needed, then it's 20%. My question is, what are the other 70 or 80% of the residents going to do if they're not students? Finally, the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, states travel distances and times. So I would think that there should be similar for egress purposes, for safety standards. I would think that there would be similar literature available for children crossing a certain distance and climbing an elevation. Final thing that I'd like to say is, in my education, I was taught that the definition of engineering is responsible use of natural resources to protect life, limb, and property. Clearly, there are issues with the responsible use of the site, and LEED, the sustainability issue, leadership in energy and environmental design, is loosely spoken to in the application, stating that they are going to be sustainable by using Energy Star appliances. I don't truly believe is the intent of the practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boyle. Thank you for coming. Ann?
Good evening.
Would you tell us your name and address?
My name is Maria Amel Theodot. My address is 46 Clifton Road. I am a 20-year-plus resident of Milton and proud to say that. I am deeply concerned with this development, not only with its size and density, but also the responsibility and the aesthetics that it's going to, how it's going to affect not only the residents that are going to be living in that area, in that development, but also their butters, the neighbors. I have been in several meetings and heard a lot of the things that the council had presented in regards to safety and the children and what they're proposing to do to minimize the effect that they're going to have on wetlands and the natural habitats for wildlife. And I myself don't feel assured that that's something that's going to be abide by. My expertise is in insurance. And one of the things that has been brought to light, especially in tonight's meeting, was the impact of parking and vehicles that are going to be on the site. I have been in the insurance business for over 20 years, and my family for close to 50. And right now, the impact in regards to vehicles per household, whether it's 1 or 2 bedroom, it's 2 to 3 vehicles. That is being very conservative. Also, in regards to the comment for Route 28 being sufficient for the amount of traffic, when the highway was designed, there wasn't a volume of cars that were estimated to be traveling on Route 28 as it is now. And just basically in regards to the impact of safety and accident that has occurred in Milton alone within the past 5 years has considerably increased. And I would suggest that the board takes a serious look on the impact of vehicles that are going to be introduced in the Milton area and the impact that it's going to have to the safety of the children that's going to not only be living on the sites but are also that live in surrounding neighborhoods. I, for one, do feel and applaud Milton for trying to address the affordable housing, but I also believe that affordable housing should be done in a responsible and safe environment, and that is going to be not only good for the people that are going to be living there, but the people that have been living in the Milton area for a number of years. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much for coming and for your comments. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard?
Hi, my name is Gene Irwin, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. I live at 120 Highland Street.
Good. Welcome back to the board, Mr. Irwin.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I'm very familiar with this neighborhood. I've walked all around it and the whole bit, and one of my concerns of this neighborhood is inside of these 90 units, when you have children or just even adults who are friends in that neighborhood, and they want to go visit their friends on foot, there are no sidewalks in that neighborhood. The only sidewalk is on Randolph Ave. There's no sidewalk across the street on Pleasant Street. There's no sidewalks on Reed Street. There's no sidewalks on Highland Street until you get up to Clifton Road. There's no sidewalks going over to Fletcher's Steel. So even the people, we talk about how pedestrian-friendly this development's going to be. Most of the people in this room live between this development at 711 Randolph Ave, yet they all drove to this meeting, I bet, here at Town Hall. Most of these same people I know who live between Milton Hospital and this development drive to Milton Hospital. So I don't know why everyone in this development is suddenly going to become pedestrian and athletic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Thanks for coming. So I think we've heard from all of the public comment. The attorneys seem to be willing to have said their piece. So other than the...
I do have some concluding remarks.
Hold on one second.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
No, Mr. Mr. Mullen wants to defer to you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'd rather address questions before wrapping up, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm interested in what you would say to the town selectman's suggestion about modifying the density in the site as presented tonight.
Well, as we've indicated earlier, and we've actually met with some abutters recently, we are amenable to reducing density to a degree, but not remotely as significantly as been suggested by Katie Conlon.
I'm concerned that we haven't had, to Alex Whiteside's memo and the planning board, we haven't heard from the planning board. I'm appreciative of Alex, the time that Alex spent putting the memo together, but I'm pretty sure this will be the largest residential building ever constructed in the town of Milton. Pretty sure of that. And I'm concerned we haven't had enough discussion about how it looks, what it feels like, and all of the issues that we usually don't get involved in.